All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Leah and I wanted to do a special webinar because there seems to be some information going around that may not be as accurate or as reliable as we would want it to be. And so we thought we'd give out some information on dirty data and the problems it causes. Now, data is becoming more and more important to our operations, to the systems that we're running, to our business intelligence. And now with artificial intelligence, data really is that backbone that it needs in order to learn and to be useful. So we thought we'd get into a little bit more information on why not all data is created equal. Leah?
Yes. Hello, everyone. So interesting that we picked the Friday before apartments lies to to talk about data, Carla. Why do
I
we
know.
do this to ourselves? I
I
don't
had
know.
no idea.
But we're
But
going
it's
to have a good time. We're going to have a good time talking about it.
absolutely. It's definitely a relevant topic, and what we're going to do first is we're going to lay the groundwork and we're going to talk about the different types of data that is available to us as operators, as multifamily professionals. And then we're going to look at some of the ways that data may become compromised, right? So let's go ahead and dive in to the types of data that we may be using at different parts of our operations. So we like to think of data as either third, second, first, or zero party data. So what does that mean? Well, let's start with third party data. So this is data that is collected by others who do not interact directly with your customers. You can think of third-party data as kind of like market intelligence. Think of the census. That's third-party data. Think of economic data that's available through maybe like the jobs report. You can think of other data sources that are aggregating all of this information, and that's available for you to use and extract to try to create some intelligence around. Third party data in our industry is typically used very heavily when we're thinking about building new construction. Where should we build? What type of community should we build? Where is their need? Where's the demand greatest, right? So they're going to use all these different sources to try to make a very informed and intelligent decision.
Yes. And second party data, I think for us at Apartment Ratings and Satisfax, we kind of have our toes in all of these, buckets, right? But with second party data, an example would be like our biennial online renter study. This is data that we collect. We have collected for a number of years. It's really stuff that like we're willing to share. We want to provide this information to really help kind of push along your decision making, maybe even help you identify trends that are happening or even patterns when it comes to renters. But it's essentially data that you're able to collect from trusted external sources. And so we can use, or you all can use that second party data for a variety of different things. And we also know that one of the biggest things when it comes to that second party data is making sure that the data is as transparent as possible. You know where it came from, how it was collected, sort of like the overall methodology, how that data was analyzed. But really, that second party data is to help sort of support some of your internal data as well.
And then that brings us to first party data. Now, this is data that you as an organization, your company is gathering from your customer interactions, right? Or your employee interactions. So this is think of it as interaction data that lives in your property management systems, your website analytics, payment history. So your customers aren't necessarily giving you this information. You're more gathering information, and it can be very telling, right? Maybe you want to know how often someone is logging into the portal, right? You can go in and look at the login history. That's a transactional data. Are they logging in the morning? Are they logging in at night, right? Your web analytics data can tell you what kind of device are they using to log in? Is it a desktop? Is it a mobile? What size is that screen? What's the resolution? So all that intelligence can inform strategy. It's a little bit closer to your particular users, your customers, your employees than say third party or second party data.
Yeah, and finally, zero. And Carla, after I explain the zero party data, I want you to give the group sort of your take as to why we ordered these almost sort of in reverse. I think it's pretty fascinating. Instead of kind of starting with zero and working our way up to third, we're starting at third and working our way down to zero.
Hmm.
So, zero party data is data that is explicitly provided to you by a person. So, this could be your renter, this could be a prospect. It's really information that they're willing to share directly with you, whether that's, your surveys, you might do some kind of feedback form. There's polls, there's all sorts of ways, employee surveys. These are also your customers. So, people who have had a firsthand experience with your company and they're willing to share that their feedback about that experience directly with you. So,
Hmm.
Carla, you want to give the group kind of your reasoning for why it's easy to sort of, explain these data types in almost like a reverse order?
Yeah, the way that I like to think of it is that third-party data is the furthest away from our customers, right? It's maybe not as relevant as our zero-party data. So I feel that the closer to zero we get, the closer to our customers we can get, right? Especially in marketing, especially in user experience. That zero-party data is really the data that's going to tell you how do you surprise and delight your customers, your renters, your prospects, because not all people are the same, and there are a variety. We are, human beings after all. We all have different wants and needs and preferences, and so when we look at third-party data, how are we able to tell if that's our demographic, right? Where when we get to that zero party data, we're really honing in on that sample that's most relevant to us.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you and I had this conversation as we were putting this presentation together. And in my mind, I see online reviews as being sort of closer to that zero party data. This is feedback that people who have had firsthand knowledge are willing to share with you. But for me, I think where I was looking at it, or my perspective is coming through like our verified resident program. So
Hmm.
after someone takes a survey, we then ask them if they want to write a review that's posted on apartment ratings. It's coming from a verified resident. So it's the same source, right? It's the same person talking about their experience. They're but they're leaving there, or they're using two different mechanisms. They're
Hmm.
using the surveys and they're also writing a review. But you had a really interesting take in terms of like verified customer data, right? That's like
Hmm.
that zero party versus like what we see here in online review data being collected from external sources, falling more under that third party bucket.
Absolutely. Because we don't own it, right? With that zero party data, we are asking a question and we are getting the answer, and that answer lives with us. When it comes to online reviews, it is the platform that is available to anyone who wants to contribute their opinion on that platform. So there are different ways to slice and dice data, and sometimes that one thing like an online review may fall under third party, may also fall under zero, depending on the mechanism and the way in which we acquired that review.
Yeah, and also how that data was delivered sort of down the chain, right, from that
Hmm.
review platform into the management company's hands, if you will.
Hmm.
Which brings us to the entire purpose of the session today and why we're talking about dirty data, the importance of understanding sort of what contributes to data errors, maybe even some tips and things that you can look out for to ensure that the data that you're basing your business decisions on is as clean as it can possibly be. We always say bad data, can lead to bad decisions, and so we, want to
Garbage
make
in,
sure.
garbage out.
Yep, garbage in, garbage out. Exactly. We want to make sure that that data that's hitting your desk or hitting your inboxes or is being handed to you is as clean as it can possibly be. So we have 5 culprits that could potentially sabotage your data reporting. And Carla, you're going to start out with number 1, right?
Scraping errors. All right, so this is very relevant. It's becoming even more relevant. We all know in our industry that we are having a challenge sharing data between systems. So some applications, we can call it, have resorted to scraping data instead of being sent data or being given access to pull or download data. So what that means is they're using computer software and it's reading a web page. So if you've ever used like a Snagit tool to take a copy of a screen, it kind of scrolls down the page and then it takes a copy of everything that's on that screen. Well, that's kind of how scraping software works. It uses sophisticated mapping tools to say, okay, I'm going to take this data from this part of the website and this copy over here, and then I'm going to push it all into a spreadsheet. Now, the problem with scraping websites is that all sorts of errors can happen, right? The scraper might misfire. It might mismark a section of the website. It might read the information wrong. It might only scrape a portion of what it was supposed to. So imagine if there's someone who's trying to aggregate data. Let's just keep in the wheelhouse that we understand online reviews, the best. If someone went to grab all of the reviews on your listings, maybe they only get half of each of review, or maybe they only get every other review, because these tools, they're not a connection, they're not an integration. They are literally going and copying in mass quantities information from one screen to the next. And having just completed a 6-month long qualitative project in which I had to scrape social data, I can tell you that these tools they're imperfect. They just do not always get all of the data or all of the fields in the right way. So we have to be very mindful of that. Also, the reason why a lot of companies will use scraping tools is because they don't have the permission to actually pull that data from a more official uh, way, right, through a connection. And that could be in violation of that website's terms of service. So we got to be really careful when we're looking at data from another provider, when someone's giving you a report and they're saying, oh, I got this data from over here and this data over from there. How did they acquire that data? So best practices, confirm data sources and methodology with any vendors that are providing you reporting. How are they gathering that data? What is the method that they're using? And if they are indeed scraping websites, you really want to assess that quality, communicate any concerns, negotiate any remedies if you can, if there's any way that you could facilitate better data aggregation tools, um, or explore alternatives. Are there other sources that you can use that have a better connection?
Yeah, and I think scraped data has gotten better because technology has gotten better, right? Like, let's just kind of be fair. It's gotten better, but there should always be sort of a level of quality assurance in there as well. Kind of double checking that, what you're receiving or what you're seeing kind of matches back if you were to do your double checking it manually. Picking out one community, kind of going back through everything takes a little bit of work, but when we're leaving things sort of up to machines, to do the work for us, something could be missed. Number two is outdated data. This, I think, is kind of, sometimes you get the set and forget, like you kind of set something and, maybe set a formula, or you set a KPI, and it's just what you've done for the last, 5 years. And that's just how it's always been done. Knowing that outdated data may not reflect where renters are right now. And I have to say, we've kind of been in this position as well with our biennial online renter study. Initially, when we did the study, the plan was every 4 years. We had to tighten that window to 2 years because of how quickly things change with renters. And Carla, you and I have had discussions like maybe this is a study that we need to do every year because
Hmm.
we start to see so many things change in a very dramatic way in such a short period of time.
Hmm.
So when it comes to outdated data, we know, again, because renter behaviors change, because maybe even your employees and your business models and the way that you guys are currently operating your organizations, those things can change over time. And so is the data that's going into your reporting as up to date as possible? We were joking about this word yesterday, obsolescence. That's our big word of the week.
Obsolescence.
Obsolescence can actually lead to skewed results. If your data is so far out of date, we see it all the time because our surveys, we know that those things are coming real time. Our Epic Index updates nightly because, again, anything can change when it comes to your renters. And if that data is old, it does make it pretty much impossible to have accuracy when
Hmm.
you are tracking your key metrics. You can still run reports. You can still have, outcomes, presented to you, but how accurate is that information? And if you're making data based on, or excuse me, making decisions based on outdated data, it could potentially point you in the wrong direction. You might be wasting money when it comes to your marketing strategies. You might be underestimating what you need for each of your communities. So, I think I won't spend a whole lot of time on this one. I think it sort of goes with, the territory. If the data's outdated, your reporting is going to be flawed, right? So some best practices in that area is establish sort of regular data refresh schedules. Again, like I said, some of our metrics update every single day because it just, again, the only way to keep that data as fresh as possible. We have surveys that are real time. So, you just kind of never know what's going to be happening
Yeah.
with your renters, and sort of everything that's happening with your businesses. But you want to ensure that your data sets are updated frequently, so it does reflect that sort of current reality, what's really happening right now. And that new data can help you forecast what could potentially happen going down the line.
Yeah. And speaking of outdated data, when a community, let's think of it in the idea of a brand new development, there's a lot of research that goes into developing that brand, right? What is the brand going to be for this community? What's that target audience that we're going after? What's the messaging that we should use to, entice that target audience, right? That's all done even before you break ground sometimes. But is that still your target audience 3 years later? 2 years
Great
later,
point.
4 years later, right? So when we talk about the age of data, we're saying, okay, maybe we need to look and see now that we actually have residents, uh, should we be shifting that brand identity a little bit? Should we be shifting that uh, brand content? Did our audience segmentation change from when we were a lease up to now after we've been stabilized for a year or two? So if we're still operating using that old intelligence, we could be missing the mark. We could be missing leases. So really important, especially when we're dealing with people, because people change so quickly. So that's customers, that's prospects, that's resident expectations, that we're doing regular research and audience segmentation and uh, developing new strategies at least annually at the least. So this brings us on to number 3, inconsistent definitions. Now this one's one of my favorites. um, Having worked in operations, I was an administrator of several different systems. So, I had a system for my customer relationship management, system for property management, a system for accounting. We had all these different systems, and they were gathering all these transactions, and they had all these different data points. And sometimes they'd have the same data point in 2 different systems. One I remember very clearly was market rent. Problem is, one system calculated market rent one way, the other system calculated it a different way. And so that caused a lot of confusion. So when it comes to these systems and how we label them, it's really important that we understand, how is that data being gathered? What is the equation that's creating that number? What is that data really telling me? Another one you see a lot of the time is the difference between a lease start date and a move-in date. Should they be the
Hmm.
same? Are they different? What does that mean, right? So making sure that we have a shared understanding of what data means, what it represents, is so very important, because when you're going to start bringing your data together from different systems, if you're going to build a data warehouse, right? If you're going to start training an AI model, it is so important that everyone knows, well, this means this is how it's calculated, and this system does it this way, and that system does it this way, and that there's that recognition of it. So inconsistent labeling can definitely be a problem when you're thinking about your different systems.
Yeah, and if you think too, there are some companies where within their portfolio, they use multiple property management, systems. Somebody
Mhm.
might be on Yardi, somebody might be on Entrada, somebody might be on, a different one. And, no problem there being able to operate using that platform for, your community. It's when all of that data is trying to be aggregated together into one, report, kind of merging all of those data sets together.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's That's where the magic happens. That's the problem, right? Is
Mhm.
when you can bring all the data sets together in like a business intelligence tool, when you can start really laying, uh, graphs and trends and data on top of one another. But if that data isn't standardized, if that terminology isn't shared, then what you're looking at really isn't going to make much sense, right? So, best practices, develop and maintain a centralized data dictionary. Make sure that each data point that you're using in your business intelligence is clearly defined and standardized terminology. You want those data definitions to be relevant across your systems and throughout your processes.
Yes. And so Carla and I, we're going to sort of tag team on number 4 and number 5. I'm going to kind of take the front end when we're talking about bias, and Carla's going to take the back end when we're talking about reporting bias. So, up front is sampling bias. And I had to explain this to Carla. Like, I have to make things so super simple in my head, or else I'm not able to articulate it when I'm presenting information. So when I think about sampling bias, I think about it in terms of it's the who you ask problem. So who are you asking? Who are you selecting? Who are you sort of reaching out to be able to provide that zero party feedback or that zero party data that we talked about earlier in the beginning? So if your teams are, let's say, surveying residents that only come to an event, or asking residents to write reviews at an event. They're happy, maybe they, just want a prize at your event or something like that. Uh, that's only targeting those residents that actually showed up and maybe not giving opportunities to a broader audience, right? Review gating. I think people are probably like up to their ears, like enough already hearing Carla and I talk about review gating or incentivizing reviews. However, that is one of those the problems, right? When it comes to making sure your data is as clean as it can possibly be, consider who you're asking. If you're just looking at data from incentivized residents, or you're just looking at data from those who sort of passed your test, I'm using air quotes over here, and we're able to, move forward when you're talking about being able to write a review. If there is, maybe you think, we're just going to go ahead and survey pet owners because we want to know the kind of improvements, that they want to see at the community. Do you want a dog park? Do you want mobile grooming? Do you want a pet washing station? You maybe think like, well, that makes sense because this is an important group. We're asking about, pet amenities. We should only be reaching out to pet owners. That's that unconsciously sort of designing your sample method. But what about those that maybe would love to have a pet, or are currently considering, currently in the process of adopting a pet? You might miss out on being able to collect information from a really relevant group of residents. So those kinds of things are, really important in thinking about who are we asking, who
Hmm.
contributed to this data that we're looking at. Did we ask enough people? Did we, look at our population as a whole, as opposed to sort of like micro little groups here and there? And again, if you have a chosen set, it may not accurately represent your entire customer base. So, looking again at that sampling bias and why that data that comes from them could potentially be flawed, could potentially have some errors in there. It really does come down to the who you ask at the beginning of it all.
Hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
So some best practices, or a best practice is, think about randomized sampling. We do this quite a bit, looking at, ways to ensure that how you're collecting that data is unbiased, and it really is representative of your entire population. You may decide, well, we want to look at trends over time. So we are going to survey residents, maybe once a quarter, and rotate that throughout your community, as opposed to once a year, but it's only residents who have lived there for at least 6 months. Again, you could potentially be missing out on a larger group there. Carla, anything you want to add on this one?
Absolutely. As I was learning in the industry, I relied a lot on reports from different partners and in the industry. They'd put out different studies, case studies, surveys. The biennial online renter study was very influential to me as I was learning about reputation management. What I've come to realize, though, is that not all studies are created equal. And so when you're thinking about these culprits of dirty data, there's another way to think about it, is what to look for when you're reading these reports, and understanding how they did their sample is very important. And a really good study, a really good report is going to give you that information. It's going to say, here's the sample methodology, and here's the demographics of the people who responded. That's really going to help you understand how relevant that data is to you, right? Is it in line with your customer data and demographics? Maybe there's some slight variations. So look for that when you're using data, when you're using reports to make decisions, to design strategy. Make sure that you understand how that sample was designed, and what the demographics were of that sample, so that you can know if the trends, or uh, the the things that were uncovered from that study are relevant to you.
Carla, I think it's so interesting that you said that, because when I see a study, and it doesn't even have to be industry related, it could
Mhm,
be from Pew Research, it could be from Wall Street Journal, it could be anywhere. But
mhm.
the very first thing that I look at is the sample methodology. That is
Mhm.
I want to know how many people, I want to know the time period that the data was collected. I want to know as much as possible about the who you ask before I start even, I don't want to say believing the numbers, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that the sampling bias, if that has been removed for me in my eyes, if I don't really suspect that, I find the data to be more accurate and more truthful than just sort of looking at the numbers after the fact.
Exactly. Exactly. It really is indicative of a transparent report, that they will give you detailed information on their sample methodology, which brings us to the next bias, which is response bias. So this is the what you asked problem, right? So now we know who we're asking. We've got our sample, we've got respondents, and now we're asking them questions. There, we say this at Satisfax all the time. Not all surveys are created equal. Anyone could design a survey, ask questions, but are you asking those questions in the right way? Are you using the right words? Are the questions in the right order? Because depending on the words you use and the order you ask questions, it can introduce bias. So some examples of that could be, if you say, you rate our excellent maintenance team on a scale of 1 to 5, right? Well, you use the word excellent in there. So now you've introduced bias into that person, that respondent's answers. They heard the word excellent, so now their answers might skew a bit more positive. On the other hand, let's say you're asking a couple of different questions. One's about, how satisfied are you with your rent charges? The other one's about noise level. And then the third one's, your overall satisfaction. Well, you started with two very negative topics, rent and noise. So if you ask those two questions first, and then you ask, well, how are you feeling overall? Well, they're already like very upset about the rent. They're very upset about the noise. They're probably, their overall feeling is not going to be very happy. So you have to think about that survey design, right? And what I find very interesting is the number of the research reports that are written about developing research. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a plethora of research on research out there. And they get into so much detail, testing, you know, different verbiage, different orders. Um, uh, do we ask questions always in the same order? Do we randomize that? Who's better at interpreting data? Is computer or is it a person? So there's just so much out there to understand just in the design of your that this could be your questionnaire, your surveys, even your guest cards. Think of your guest
Mm-hmm.
card as like a mini questionnaire, right? What questions are you asking? Some people are of the mind of, oh, I just want to get the lead. I'm going to ask as few questions as possible. Everything's going to be, optional. And then that's another thing. Do you make questions optional? Or do you allow them to skip questions? Do you make them answer questions or do you allow them to say, um, you know, refrain from responding or do not want to provide that answer? So lots of stuff to think about when you're designing surveys, and really that's why you've got partners like us, not to toot our own horn, but we have been developing and running multifamily consumer marketing research for over 20 years here at Satisfax. So those best practices, we have found our own biases and corrected them over years of experimentation. So let the professionals consult with you. If you're thinking about a research project, reach out to trained researchers. Do your pilot testing. That's a real big important part of doing
Yep.
zero party, is to pilot test to find out where all those biases are before you do the greater research project. So design that survey and feedback mechanism with careful consideration, right? For your wording, for the order, for the format, so that you can reduce that response bias.
So I will share a personal story about my life prior to Satisfax. I was in charge of running our resident feedback program, and knowing that, knowing what I didn't know back then. I thought it would be super simple. We put together a little questionnaire. We use, we pay for a survey platform I will not name, but everybody on the call probably knows what I'm talking about. And we do it in house. We do it all on our own. We, send the emails out to our residents that just moved in or had a work order, all of those sort of little touch points, and collect this data and do whatever we will with it. Point us in the right direction. Oh, holy survey that we've done all by ourselves. And coming to Satisfax, I quickly realized the questions we were asking were completely pointing us in the wrong direction because of how we were asking the questions. And then what was super interesting to me, and we've made these adjustments even here at Satisfax, was the order of the questions. So for example, here at Satisfax, our move-in survey is designed completely different than our work order survey. And the reason being is that you're asking someone who just moved in to reflect on an entire day of their experience, right? From the time they moved, they showed up with the move-in truck to the time they put their last box in the home. With a work order survey, you're asking someone to share an experience about a moment, something that, yes, it may have taken a day or a business day, but it's one thing that happened. How I reported the problem, they fixed the problem. How do I feel about that? And so I think it's really important, to Carla's point, to your point, pointing out the importance of really having that expert support at helping craft your feedback program, because I ran our own internal program for 3 years. And it was just mind blowing to me to realize, like, oh, wow, we really didn't do this as well as we could have. So yes, if anyone is interested in studying up on research, it is it is a real thing out there. It is true, and surveys are psychological. Yeah,
Mhm.
again, it comes down to the wording that you're using. It comes down to, do you want someone to tell you how they feel, or do you want someone to tell you how well your service team performed? And those are two different types of, like, things you're trying to tap into. Do you want to know both? And so those kinds of things, again, you really do need to have some expert support behind you, just so that you're getting the most, right? You're getting what you need out of the feedback that your residents and your prospects are willing to share with you.
Absolutely. One of my biggest concerns right now is that the number of tools that are being used for sentiment analysis as
Hmm.
opposed to internal feedback systems. There are sentiment analysis tools out there that are, giving very complex reports to operators saying, hey, we looked at all your online reviews and here's what you need to work on. Understanding that online reviews are mainly third party data, right? Third or second party data. Um, eh, and they're very biased. Online reviews are extremely biased, right? And we know that in multifamily because we tend to get 1 and 5 star reviews. They're either really, really happy or they really, really don't like us, right? So, when we look at that data, we have to say this is a biased sample set and we can learn from it a little bit. But if you really want to get into sentiment analysis, you really need that zero party data. You need that internal randomized sample, the right questions at the right time in the right order, so that you can really make good decisions about what do I need to do with this community to optimize my employee experience, my resident experience, my retention, so on and so forth. Um, if you're trying to improve your online reputation, that's a whole different thing, another webinar, Leah.
Yep.
But when it comes to making strategy, operational choices, the closer to your customers, your employees you get, the better your strategy will be.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to having both that qualitative and quantitative analysis, the ability to analyze both with the data and the feedback that you're collecting.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, your best practice for response bias?
Yep, design those surveys, and that feedback mechanism carefully. Consider the questions, your wording, the order, and the format so that you can reduce that bias.
You know what? I think about how people put so much thought into a subject line of an email so
Hmm.
that they can impact, the open rate, the click rate. And it's very similar. It's like
Absolutely.
putting thought behind that so that you really do get the most out of that person's interaction
Exactly.
with your survey. So, if you guys are in the process of figuring out what you're going to throw in your suitcases for next week, as Carla and I were talking about that before this session, we hope to see you in Philly. We are going to be there. We have 3 sessions, one each day, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And our entire team, our apartment ratings and satisfacs team, sales, marketing, education, you name it, we are going to be in the exhibit hall at booth 1707. We have some really neat things planned. And we're also doing this special. I don't know how the sales team is doing this, but they're doing free surveys for a year. And so if you're really interested in, again, getting that reliable zero party data, you can absolutely stop by, chat us up, see what that's all about. Carla, are you looking forward to anything in particular next week?
Well, I've never really been to Philly. The last time I went, I was in and out, so I would like to see the Rocky Steps. That's in Philly, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, I'd like to see that. And then, the session that I'm hosting with Jay Harris, who's an attorney. He's very close to the new FTC rules. He's going to explain some of those updates to the guidelines. And then I've got an amazing brand director joining our session from Burger, Angie, who just has given me has some examples of some really great influence marketing. I can't wait to share those with audiences. So I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Well, safe travels to everyone who's headed to Philly next week. If not, and you're holding down the fort for for your company and your teams, all the best next week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and
Yes.
we'll see you around.
Thank you. Bye, guys.